Hey Dungepegs, what's going on? It's LandonRemixes here, and welcome to my review of the sophomore album from the British trio Nero. This one is called Between Two Worlds, the two representing the fact that it's the second album from the group. Now, this album wasn't something I was initially really excited about. I have been anticipating it since they announced it, being like, oh, it's going to release in August, September. I think that they may have pushed it back a little bit from the original release date. But it was something I was anticipating, not something I was necessarily extremely excited for. But regardless, I was going to review it, and now we're finally at this point where we're there. Now, Nero kind of got popular in the 2011 Skrillex bro step era with their song Promises, which was remixed by Skrillex and Nero themselves. And this kind of style is something that I wasn't really into at the time. I didn't really like Skrillex at the time or Nero, to be completely honest, and this wasn't exactly the point that I was into electronic music. Might have been part of the reason for why I wasn't crazy about their first album, Welcome Reality. But with this new record, I was a little excited to see what they'd bring in store, and they definitely blew me away, completely blew away my expectations regarding this album. And this album is a concept album, which I always seem to like concept albums, especially when they're designed, the sound designs of these songs are very similar, and we get a lot of diversity managed with this, and the amount of relevancy that the albums have also play a big part in it. Whereas this album kind of, although it centers around this really dark electronic sounds, it manages to take certain sounds, like on the track Two Minds, for example, it manages to take modern sounds like future house and translate them with their own style and with the concept of the record, which is fantastic. The first track on the album, Circles, kind of gives us an idea of how the whole album's going to sound, giving us this kind of dark electronic vibe and centering heavily around Elena's vocals on this record, which, although I do like her vocals, this is a bit overwhelming throughout the album, which is the main pick I have with it, is the amount of vocals used. It kind of sounds like it's Elena's album, produced by Nero, which Matt Meadow actually quoted from your EDM. He quoted this from another critic and said that people would be quick to criticize this album because of its intense amount of vocals. And I do agree with that, and I am one of those critics that's going to kind of subtract my score a little bit for this reason. And for the track The Thrill, which I didn't really like that much, probably got too used to the Porter Robinson remix, but because of this track, because of that, and because of the stylistic elements used in it, I don't feel like it fit in as well as the other tracks. Ended up being my least favorite on the record, even though the Porter Robinson remix is probably one of my favorite remixes ever. And a lot of the filler tracks in this album, I wouldn't really call anything filler tracks because, like I said, this is a concept record and it works very well, just like Porter Robinson's Worlds worked last year because it was a concept record. We get tracks like Between Two Worlds, the title track, and What Does Love Mean? Things like that seem like filler tracks, but definitely work very well within the context of the album. I didn't really like this album when the singles were coming out, but as they kind of stack it into concept album form, it definitely works a lot better than I had expected it was going to work. Singles like Satisfy, which find its place very well on this record. There's the track Into the Night, which is more of a duo, which I really was into. The fact that they finally brought a male vocalist on this track. I think it's one of the members of the group. I'm probably wrong, because I'm wrong about a lot of things. People are going to complain. Whatever. I didn't check up on the facts on that particular song. But this is a very groovy song, kind of reminds me of a Daft Punk One More Time kind of feel, but translates it into a very relevant and modern sound, and probably my favorite track on the record. We get Dark Skies, which is the only track on the record that doesn't have Elena's vocals on it. A beautiful track, and definitely pretty heavy, although it does have certain elements of beauty, and I think it works as a track. We get Into the Past, which was featured a couple years ago on the Great Gatsby soundtrack, and even though it was on this soundtrack, it's rebooted onto this album and translated to be able to fit in with the context of this record, which I was very impressed with. We get the track Tonight, which classic Nero fans are definitely going to like a lot more of that heavy bro step kind of sound. I wouldn't really say it's dubsteppy, but it's definitely closer to the sound Nero was going with the album Welcome Reality, and even though it does center around that sound on this track, I really enjoyed it. That's also one of my favorites from the record. And the album closes out with this kind of somber track called Wasted, and I also really enjoyed that one. And you kind of have to listen to the whole album to get the whole experience of this thing. And if you're whether or not you're into that dark electronic sound, I think you'll be into this, because I didn't really think I was going to enjoy something like this, but it ended up being a strong concept record and probably the best music I've ever heard from the trio, and I'm going to say it's probably one of the best albums of the year. I wouldn't say it's my top yet, but unless I listen to it a bunch more times and happen to really dig it, I don't think this album is quite at the top of my list, but it's fairly close. Like I said, definitely works as an awesome concept. I'm going to give this one a solid 9. Don't think it quite deserved where I put Kendrick Lamar and Zed, although Zed's a little questionable. People are complaining that I give very positive reviews for albums that are primarily house, but the reason why I gave Zed's album such a high rating is because I really, really liked most of the songs in that. Whether or not it's primarily house is not a huge deal to me. It's whether or not I like all the material that's going to give me a really good rating, which is partially why this album, I'm going to give it such a good rating, because I enjoyed most of the material on it, and there was only one song I really couldn't get into, and it works very well as a concept record. And if you disagree with that, whatever. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you want to complain, whatever, go ahead. I'm not really gonna care. I've had to clear comments or actually I disabled comments on a couple of my old reviews because I was a little biased, but people didn't really understand that when I gave Spore's record a solid 7, and kind of explained my criticisms with it, said I didn't really like drum and bass records. My point there, I'm just going to go on a rant really quick, my point there was that it's not that I don't like drum and bass records, it's that drum and bass records typically don't branch out enough. It's that they only center around one type of genre, and that's where the downfall is with a lot of records. They center way too much around the same style, and that is a common theme with drum and bass records. I'm not saying I wouldn't like a drum and bass record. Pendulum's Immersion, for example, is technically a drum and bass record from a drum and bass band, but they tend to break out into a lot of different styles, and that kind of album would be a 10 out of 10 record for me, even though I wasn't in love with every single track on it. It's so diverse, and it centers around so many different styles and all kinds of directions that you have to love it, and that's what I was hoping to find in a record like that, and didn't. So anyway, I hope you guys didn't mind that little rant. I just decided to throw it out there for anyone that may have disliked that might be watching this. That's just my thoughts on it. I did like the record though. I like this one even more though. So many different styles, and definitely go out and purchase this. Nero, welcome reality too. Just kidding. I'll see you guys later. Peace.